Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, well, it really cuts right to the foundation of our value systems. We're talking about the source and authority of morality itself. It's a question that I think defines where we even begin to look for guidance when we have to make the most difficult choices.
I agree. This is perhaps one of the most vital ethical and philosophical inquiries we can undertake. In our modern, increasingly diverse societies, we have to find some kind of consensus on duty and value that can extend across dramatically different worldviews. The central issue is really, where do our duties actually come from? Are they invented by us, or are they discovered?
Exactly. So the central question we are debating is this. Does morality fundamentally require the existence of a God or some kind of divine mandate for its basis? Or can it be fully accounted for and sustained by human reason, our evolutionary history, and just plain social necessity? I'll be arguing that morality is fully possible, robust, and actually most effective when it's rooted entirely in human nature and common practice.
And I'll be presenting the opposing case, that the robust, non-contingent quality we attribute to genuine objective moral truth, that certainty we feel when we say acts like genocide or torture are universally wrong, requires a necessary metaphysical grounding. And this grounding, I'll argue, can only be found in a personal, authoritative, divine entity capable of, well, establishing and legislating a stable moral order.
My position really begins by reframing what we even mean by morality. I think we should view it not as some mystical description of external metaphysical facts, but as a practical, really indispensable set of human practices that are designed for large-scale social functioning. Its core function is inherently social, enabling billions of people to live together, reducing destructive conflict, and facilitating trust and cooperation. We call these practices objective for a very good reason. It's because they serve essential, universal human interests, things like stability, security, and the avoidance of suffering. If you want a society to survive, you objectively need norms against random violence and theft. These norms aren't arbitrary. They are necessities, derived from our nature as social, dependent creatures.
Okay, but wait. If morality is simply a useful set of conventions for group survival, why do we use terms like right and wrong, which carry this inherent authority? We use those terms because, I think, we intuitively recognize that certain acts are not merely inconvenient social failures. They are objectively, fundamentally wrong, independent of whether they benefit our species today. To say rape is wrong feels like stating a truth that holds whether or not the rapist is caught, or whether the act even damages the community's social fabric at all.
I understand that feeling, that sense that moral truths are immutable, but let's examine where that feeling comes from. We can trace this system of conduct back through our history. Morality has very clear evolutionary antecedents. Basic tribal norms avoiding murder, stealing, or lying within the group. These are necessities for group cohesion. Societies that develop and maintain these cooperative norms flourish, and those that do not, well, they fail. The very fact that humanity has survived and thrived is, to me, powerful evidence that morality is objectively grounded in practical necessity and survival advantage.
I see that it's functionally beneficial. I do. But functionality doesn't establish duty. What you're describing is a powerful social contract, a sort of mutually beneficial agreement, but not an obligation in the deepest sense. I worry that if utility is the ultimate measure, the truth is always contingent.
But that contingency is exactly what makes it responsive and rational. The ought is rationally justified by human flourishing, or what some might call holistic happiness. If we accept that happiness, well-being, and minimizing suffering are the ultimate ends of human action, the supreme goods, then we can derive moral principles that reliably lead us toward those ends. We ought to be good to others because meeting our own complex physical and psychological needs requires the sustained, willing cooperation of others. Selfishness, if you understand it as an attitude of prioritizing only one's own immediate, narrow interests, is profoundly antisocial. It naturally leads to loneliness, distrust, and exclusion. By contrast, being a reliable, good neighbor is tied to long-term self-interest and survival. And that connection provides a naturalistic foundation for obligation. the obligation to be rational in the pursuit of our own well-being, without ever needing to invoke a transcendent authority.
I come at it from a different way. While reason can identify what is useful or what leads to flourishing, it cannot create the authority that defines objective moral truth. My position starts with the assertion that statements like, "it is wrong to torture babies for fun," are not just descriptive statements about human preference. They are statements that correspond to a real, mind-independent moral reality. And if that moral reality exists, it requires a truth maker. This is where I think secular accounts often fall short. Merely asserting that objective moral truths exist as abstract objects, like the number 3 or the color red, or as just brute facts, is metaphysically insufficient. An abstract property cannot generate an authoritative moral claim over a sentient being. These moral truths become, floating abstractions without any anchor in reality. Crucially, impersonal things or mere properties cannot lay claims over us. They can't impose a moral duty or hold us accountable for failing to meet an obligation. Moral obligations are inherently relational and authoritative. They hold a distinct law-like character. A law, philosophically speaking, is effective and binding because it is legislated by an authorized personal agent. So if objective morality is universally applicable, imposing absolute rights and duties, it implies an effective authority to ground that obligation. In a relational moral context, these duties must be metaphysically grounded in a personal entity capable of legislating a moral order that transcends individual or societal whim. If we rely solely on the secular view, that morality is a human practice invented merely for survival, we risk a dangerous collapse into conventionalism. What happens when a powerful group decides that the collective utility is best served by eliminating a minority group? If survival is the only ultimate justification, who is to say that power does, in fact, make right? Objective morality, grounded in a divine standard, ensures those fundamental truths remain stable and universally applicable, guaranteeing accountability and justice that stands outside of our fluctuating human consensus.
I see why you feel that the inherent authority of morality requires a personal lawgiver, but that perspective introduces the ancient problem of divine command. If God is required to make an act good, then goodness becomes arbitrary. It's good merely because it's commanded by an all-powerful being. If God commanded cruelty, would that then become good? Most theologians and philosophers, they balk at that.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame the relationship differently. I'm not arguing for a purely arbitrary divine command. God doesn't merely command goodness. God is the standard of goodness. He grounds the moral standard ontologically.
But if the standard of goodness is independent of God's will, as many agree, then the standard is accessible to everyone through reason. The objectivity of ethics isn't hostage to the truth of theism. Reason, which all people possess, is sufficient to arrive at consistent, responsible moral judgments. Whether you're a believer or a non-believer, you're in the exact same position when faced with the consequences of cruelty or the necessity of cooperation. This autonomy of ethics is, it's critical.
Right. But while reason can identify moral principles, it can tell us that A leads to B and B is beneficial. Reason alone does not establish obligation or duty in that law-like sense that compels universal compliance, even when it is not immediately beneficial. The secular perspective, it seems to me, inevitably reduces morality to either utility or social necessity. A robust contract, yes, but still conventional and changeable. What prevents an entire, powerful society from collectively adopting a fundamentally unjust set of norms? You mentioned that being selfish leads to being ostracized, but what if the entire society is the powerful one acting selfishly against its neighbors? If justice is merely conventional, it is inherently subject to the power of the ruling class or, the temporary consensus of the majority. The only way to truly challenge an unjust system is to appeal to a standard that transcends the system itself.
I'm skeptical of that premise because history shows that morality often improves as we shed tribal, religiously enforced worldviews. When we look back at the systems that permitted slavery, or the subjugation of women, or the demonization of non-neighbors, these were often rigidly enforced by pre-modern religious or cultural mandates. The revolutionary transformations in morality have occurred precisely as we use reason and empathy to broaden the class of individuals entitled to moral respect, moving away from restricted tribal moralities. The core norms, avoiding murder, stealing, and lying, they remain constant because they are necessary for any functional society. But their application becomes wider as we live in a globally interdependent society. We're driven by economic necessity and mass communication, forcing us to blend in and accept everyone as a moral neighbor, not by divine fiat, but by shared interest.
I agree that the sphere of moral consideration has expanded, but I worry about the foundation of that expansion. If morality is merely a beneficial byproduct of evolution to keep us alive, we lose the crucial distinction between what is functionally beneficial and what is fundamentally right. We speak of moral truths as being necessary, like 2 + 2 = 4, not contingent on whether or not they help our species survive the next millennium. If raping is wrong is only true because it harms species flourishing, that truth is highly contingent. It's easily undermined by calculated power gains or short-term utility for a dominant group. The very concept of moral progress relies on an external, static standard of good that we are moving toward. If our morality is just a moving target defined by the current utility of our species, then what are we progressing to? It lacks the objective ontological reality that a divine standard or truth maker provides, guaranteeing that the wrongness exists independently of human desires or survival calculations.
The progress is toward maximizing flourishing and minimizing suffering. Those are universal and necessary goals. The moral standard isn't an abstract fixed point, but a constant recalculation of the best way to achieve those goals with the least cost. A divine mandate, historically, often introduces arbitrary duties, rules that don't clearly relate to well-being, and it heightens tribal conflicts over ideological purity, hindering the very consensus that reason naturally builds. Our shared human needs, discovered through experience and rational reflection, are a far more reliable and, I think, universal guide.
But the moment we remove that transcendent anchor, we remove the ultimate, non-negotiable authority. And while I acknowledge the risks of religious conflict, the risks of purely secular utility where the strong can redefine the good based solely on their own survival needs are to me far greater. The law-like character of moral duty demands a lawgiver, ensuring that our deepest moral convictions about necessary truth are not just cultural preferences, but reflections of an ultimate reality that holds even the most powerful accountable.
So, to summarize my position, morality is profoundly human. It's rooted in our rational capacity to pursue collective and individual happiness. It's a necessary set of practices discovered through experience that maximize flourishing and minimize suffering. We've seen that reason is fully capable of navigating complex moral dilemmas and driving moral progress. Our focus should be on building universal consensus based on our shared human needs rather than searching for metaphysical anchors that, in practice, often introduce arbitrary duties and, frankly, fuel tribal conflict.
Conversely, while the functionality of human cooperation is undeniable, achieving true objective moral truth, that universal authoritative nature of duty, requires a necessary metaphysical grounding. Absent a personal authoritative standard, moral obligations risk becoming either arbitrary facts or just merely descriptive accounts of social utility. The inherent authority and non-contingent nature of moral truth strongly suggests the need for a divine lawgiver to ensure the ultimate reality and authoritative imposition of objective morality that cannot be undone by human power.
We've explored the tension between morality as a necessary, functional human invention discovered through the constant negotiation of choice-making and relationship, which yields flexible yet reliable principles,
and morality as a dependent product of transcendent authority, grounded in something that exists independently of human consensus, guaranteeing a standard of justice that cannot be overturned by brute force or calculated utility.
Both perspectives, I think, illuminate profound and enduring aspects of our ethical lives and demonstrate the intellectual weight of the question of morality's ultimate origin. We leave it to our listeners to consider whether the strongest moral requirements are forged in the fires of human relationship or legislated from beyond.